Welcome to the Homeschool High School podcast, brought to you by Seven Sisters Homeschool.com and the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. I'm Vicki, and I am so excited to have our friend Suzanne Gose back. And Suzanne and us go way back with the beloved 2-to-1 conference. So I remember us sitting on the bed in the hotel room eating snacks at the end of a long day.
I'm glad you remind me of that every time. That was so fun. I was so scared of all of y'all, and you were so lovely and welcoming.
It's one of my treasured moments. I think it was my first 2-to-1 maybe. And I go oh, look, we're making friends with all of these new people. It was so exciting.
It was.
So here we are today, and we're going to talk a little bit about flip-flop Spanish, but really our topic today is homeschooling multiple teens, because both of us have had multiple teens, but Suzanne's in the thick of it. So yes. I thought if we could get a mom's real life stories about what it's like at her house, homeschooling multiple teens, that people might feel encouraged and maybe even pick up a survival tip or two as they're launching into this. So Suzanne, tell us about your family and your homeschool story and homeschooling lots of kids.
So right now they are ages 15 to 22, I think, 23. I don't know. Once they get out of after 20, it's kind of hard to keep track of. Yeah. But we have 2 left of the 5. And they're 15 and 17. She'll actually be 16, and probably by the time this launches, so she'll be 16 in a couple of weeks. So the thing is, back in the day, that means they were 5 to 12. And so it was really, really hard back when they were little. And now it's much, much easier having 5 kids within 6.5 years.
So the baby is going to be 16 here.
Yeah.
Shortly.
Very interesting. Yeah. So she is not as eager to learn to drive as the other 4 were. And it's okay. It's so interesting how you treat the caboose, and you say you won't, right? I'm not going to treat the baby different. I'm going to hold my line. I'm going to stay disciplined. We're going to keep the same rules. And here I am, and I'm doing it. I'm more relaxed with her because there's nobody under her to train.
Yeah.
And so, and nobody minds. The older ones are totally happy about hauling her around and driving her places, and nobody's upset about it. It's so interesting.
So tell me, did you homeschool all the way through?
Yes. I was a public school teacher back in the day before babies. And then I retired for what I thought would be a very short time to have our first child. And then I was going to go back whenever he got kindergarten age. That was my assumption. Okay, put him back in and I go back to public school. I loved teaching in public school. It was difficult, but I loved it. Mm-hmm. And but I was very bored. I had this tiny little baby that wasn't conjugating verbs, and he didn't care to learn Spanish yet. I was speaking to him in Spanish, but anyhow, I heard about homeschoolers. I sent out a little email. The next morning I had 42 responses. And so I started my Spanish classes for homeschoolers. And once I met them, I turned into a homeschooler. As soon as I saw the caliber of student that homeschoolers across the board, it wasn't like all these parents were doing something different. The one common denominator is they homeschooled, and the caliber of child and character and everything about those students was so far and above what I had experienced in the public schools, that I was like, oh, I want my baby to turn out like this. And so there I was.
So you were just not wanting to be bored, and we're going to teach some Spanish, and the homeschoolers were available, but they sold you on it without even trying, just
absolutely
themselves.
Right. The children, because they leaned forward, they asked me questions, they did their homework, they thanked me for class. I was like, what is this? I didn't know teenagers came this way. I thought teenagers grunted, did not make eye contact, and did not break stride. If you said, excuse me, they did not break stride. And I was cool. I was 24 and cool. Yeah. But it was me against them. And that was every teenager at the mall, at the grocery store. I thought that's how teens came. And then when I met this group of teenagers who were young adults, they weren't teenagers. They were young versions of adults with interesting thoughts, interesting communication that valued me as a human. And I had not experienced that yet. So when my 9-month-old was 9 months old, he wasn't walking yet. And I saw the potential of him becoming like this when he was 15. I was in, and that was it.
That was it. The homeschooling from then on. Yeah.
Yep. So none of my kids have ever gone to private or public or charter schools. They've all been homeschooled from birth all the way to now, and we have 2 left to graduate.
And did all of them study Spanish with their mom?
Yes, my husband did not speak Spanish at the time, and so I grew them up speaking to them like immersion and talking to them as they grew up, but they didn't know when they were speaking Spanish and when they were speaking English. And so that was a very frustrating point for him, and I can understand. So we waited until to treat it more like a class around 5 or 6 years old, and they were able to differentiate. So yes, all of them have been in Spanish class since they could walk.
All right. So how far apart were they then? So the oldest was.
So when the oldest was 6.5, the baby was born, and so the closest gap is 14 months. And the very biggest gap is a whole 24 months.
Wow. So you got it all done. And there's 5 of them?
There's 5 of them, yeah.
5 of them. So you definitely then had multiple teens during high school.
At one point, all 5 of them, the youngest was 13 and the oldest was 19. So even though he'd already graduated, I had all 5 as teenagers at one point.
Amazing. Amazing. So,
and it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
Yeah, well, it was this is what God gave your family, and it was the right thing for your family. So any mom that's feeling intimidated because she's got lots of teens in the house, it can be done, and you have lived through it to tell the tale.
Yes, and still am. And there's still ups and downs. I think the hardest thing even today is reminding myself that when they're prickly, hug them. You know, they get hormonal, they get moody. It's hard for us to remember, especially with the last few. You know, I've been through this with the top 3, and now I have the last 2. And you just kind of get a little commonplace because you've been through it. How many times? Well, guess what? They haven't. This is their first time to feel this way. And this is his first time to feel this way. Just because I've raised and graduated 3 others. This is new for them. And so I'm like, whatever, you'll be fine. They don't know that. And so even this morning, I had a little kerfluffle with one of them, and she was prickly. And I shrugged it off. I was like, you'll be over this. And, I just need to hold my breath. She'll be over this in a few days because I've been through this before. I opened the door. I went to slam it because she was being ridiculous. And I stopped it, and I reminded myself of the advice I keep giving people. Hug them when they're prickly. I didn't want to hug her. I turned back around, went in and hugged her, and she just relaxed and just fell into me. And that's what she needed the most. And there was nothing to be said. Just when they're the most prickly, and it's going to hurt, right? Because they feel like cactus. That would be the number one thing I would say is
that was worth the whole podcast episode. Like, really, when they're prickly, hug them.
And recognize that they've, we're on the other side, but they don't know what the other side looks like. They haven't
been there. Hey, when I'm prickly, I would like a hug.
I would too, but I know I'm like making it impossible for my husband or my children or my friend. I'm making it impossible for them to want to hug me because that's what I feel. I feel gross and awful, and I'm projecting that. And I just need somebody to say, you're still huggable. And so, and they're 30 years younger than us. How can we expect them to overcome that? So we have to overcome it for them. We have to be their frontal lobe, right? Their frontal lobe is not all the way developed until 25, as well as their brainstem. They're still figuring things out. And so we are their replacement, their substitute frontal lobe for another few years. We have to make those hard decisions for them because they don't have the capability.
That another excellent point. Human development wise, they are not fully adult yet. No. And so all of their logic and decision making skills and mood management haven't fully come online yet. And to know that, okay, part of that's our job. Yes. Right. Yeah. So if you think about that part, can you think of a time where you've got several kids in the house and you go like, I'm looking around here and I've got to do the frontal lobe stuff? Like, would that be in a situation where they're upset about academics or extracurriculars, or people been messing with my stuff? Or what kind of places have you had to be the frontal lobe for your kids?
Okay, so a lot of it's emotional and trying to bring them back to logic and asking a lot of questions. So with 13 on up, and the older they get, I think the more important it is to ask questions. Just like with a toddler, we always give them two choices. Both of them are okay. Would you like to do this first, or would you like to do this first? And so we're giving them the idea of control without actually giving them control, because we're actually in control. We know both options are fine. They don't know that.
Yeah.
That same kind of employment with teenagers, saying, well, do you think that she meant to hurt you, or do you think that maybe she was having a bad day? So whenever they're receiving something, they're defensive, they're feeling attacked, not telling them, listen, she didn't mean it that way. That begs an argument. But if you say, well, do you think this, or do you think that? Sometimes they're smarter than toddlers, right? Sometimes I don't think either of those. I think this extra thing over here. But you're still giving them the space to logic it out. A lot of us, especially as females, have to speak in order to think. Poor husbands, that's how we are.
Yes.
We can't think unless it's coming out of our mouth. And I think the teenagers, especially in both boys and girls, they have a hard time putting thoughts into bubbles without saying it out loud. So asking questions to give them that space. For emotions, for academics, same idea. Do you know that is due today, and that if you don't do it, then these other things are going to happen? And just so rather than telling them that, are you aware of that? With attitude, hey, when you just I almost slammed the door this morning, right? That's not good. That's not good modeling. I didn't, but I was close. And I said, you say to them, hey, did you mean to slam the door just then? Are you trying to send me a message that you're angry, or is there something else? Just ask as many questions as possible rather than making statements that then begs for them to say, well, let me assert my opinion on you because I don't agree.
I think that's just brilliant. In asking questions, it invites problem solving. Yes. And when you make a command, or solve the problem for them in a statement, you're right, it just begs for an argument.
Right.
So yeah.
We're raising rebels, right? They're modeling what they see, and they see these two parents who are rebelling against the system. We are rebelling against public school. We're rebelling against the government. We're rebelling against all these different things. Society says you need to do X, Y, and Z, and they have two parents that say, no, we don't. We're doing it our way. And then yet we expect them to trot along and follow what we've laid out.
That is some good food for thought. So it really behooves us to operate really highly in grace.
Yes.
And grace often looks like not slamming the door, giving hugs, and asking lots of questions.
Yes. Because it gives them space, right? When we tell them what to do, that diminishes them as a human. That devalues them. They feel little. They're not little anymore. And they feel like that old way of, you're going to do it because I tell you to do it. And we've got that thumb on top of them. Yeah. But when we ask a question, that increases their value. You are important, and I am important. I am asking you a question, and I'm remaining silent to give you the space because you're valuable, and your words are valuable, and your opinions are valuable. And we may have to talk it through, but I'm not about to squash your space and tell you this is how it is.
Yes.
Sometimes you do, right? But you try not to. You try to say, you're a valuable human that's a full person all by yourself.
Yeah. And that valuing them as a human. And that models how God sees us. He values us because he made us. All right, here's a practical question. So when you got several kids in high school at the same time, how do you handle all the different subjects? Like you got 3 people doing this math or language arts, or where are they in Spanish and all. How did you juggle all of that?
The only thing that was purely individual for each of the 5 children was math. Everything else was always going to be grouped with somebody. So none of my kids had their own anything except math. which
Mm-hmm.
they liked for, I don't know. We did Matthew C all the way across. And
Matthew C's hands on. You learn some stuff. Yep.
I mean, we switched back and forth to textbooks, teaching textbooks one time,
Yeah.
which I also liked, but it didn't work for us because it was too much screen time. But it was still great. It was like, oh, this is a great method. Too bad it's too much screen time for this kid.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just for that kid.
Everybody's different. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Everybody's different. So, so that was the only thing we did individually 100%. Everything else, I would group them, the top 3, because they're only within 3.5 years of each other, or the bottom 2. So that middle one she would be part of the littles, or she would be part of the bigs. And so I'd have the bigs doing history and then the littles doing whatever. And so I separated up in 2s or 3s, typically 2s. And then once one launched, that became easier because there's 2.
Yes.
And so even now they do the same history, the same science. One of them wanted to do a different science because she's doing pre-nursing. She's doing some dual credit stuff.
Yeah.
But we haven't done chemistry yet. And I was like, sorry. So,
it's got to be done.
Yeah, and it makes more sense for you to do it with the senior. So
Right.
the senior, and so he's going to do chemistry. Well, guess what? You're going to do it with him because that way you have built-in study partners. I can keep track of it. It's at the same time in the same day. And so a lot of it is logical and practical. And my needs for that trumps their desires for whatever they feel like doing. She can do pre-nursing next year.
Right. And so when part of the figuring it all out is what are the needs of the whole group?
Yes.
And in a specific case, sometimes they learn patience by waiting until the next year or the next semester to take something that they want. Yep. Yeah. And that's part of the okay, sometimes we can ask questions and give hugs, and sometimes we say, sorry, kid, it's got to be this way.
Right. And I have to admit, I'm guilty of the old pull out. Well, in public school, we didn't have any choice at all. We had this. 9th grade was this, 10th grade was this. It was at this time. And if you didn't like your teacher, too bad, So I would definitely, I'm guilty of absolutely saying, listen, the truth is they don't know how good they have it. They just don't. And they won't be able to. And I have to be okay with that. They don't understand the freedom that they're, enjoying. They have no idea.
Yeah, I know it was my kids when they went off to college and, they would make friends and swap stories about their different educational experiences. And they would really go like, wow, that was different. Or they'd run into another homeschooler and go, you too?
I've heard a little bit about that, but not too much so far. So we'll see as they continue to get older and tell me about stuff.
Now, the ones how many have graduated at this point?
I've got 3 out and 2 still at home. So I've got this coming year, I'll have a junior and a senior. And she's young. She's a summer birthday. So she's considering doing that. What do you call it? The super senior year?
Yeah. Yes.
Because she's just now turning 16. So when she graduates, she'll still just be 17. She'll turn 18 after she graduates. And so she's playing around with that idea and we're open to it. So
there's no race, and there's not one right way to handle all this. So yeah. How have you found with your different kids? Because they all tend to have different personalities and God has different plans. How have you helped them figure out like who they are, like what God was leading them to while you're juggling all these teens all at the same time?
So for me, I was really blessed with being a curriculum writer and going to these conventions because I would choose 1 or 2 kids to go with me to do the booth work. And so to recreate that idea, I'm just so grateful for that because I don't know that I would have known. I hope maybe some mom would have told me. So maybe, I'm the older mom that gets to tell some youngers, create opportunities for you to be in the car by yourself with just 1 at a time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the biggest part. I mean, 8 hours on the way to Arizona or New Mexico or wherever you're going with just 1 kid. So much talking and understanding happens there.
Yeah.
And so much like kind of pushback. The kid is kind of allowed to push back a little bit because there's nobody that they're modeling for, especially my oldest.
Yes. Right.
I mean, he's the perfect Paul, toe the line, do everything right.
Yeah.
And would never question me or my opinion in front of the others. But when it was me and him together, it was wonderful because he and I could just visit.
I have found that car time is one of the most precious times. So I don't know whether I've ever had one-on-one with one of my kids for 8 hours, but we've had like running errands together and stuff like that. And you can have some serious conversations. Like they will come up with stuff
Yeah.
in a car. Uh,
Right. And yeah, and I think the biggest cue is don't turn on the radio. When
right.
you get in the car, if you have a kid with you, leave the radio off. If they say,
Yeah.
"Hey, can I turn on the radio?" Say, "Let's just wait a little bit."
Yeah.
And don't ask any questions and
Hmm.
don't bring anything up. Just
Hmm.
drive in silence and
Hmm.
probably and make sure their earbuds are out. No, you
Yeah.
don't need anything in your ear right
Yeah.
now. Let's just enjoy the silence. And usually something will come up. You just have
Something
to
will come
provide the space and the time for that.
up. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, all right. So, how did you handle Spanish? Because that's so important. Like that is your thing. How did you handle it? Did you need to adapt it for different personalities of your kids, or could they just do flip flop Spanish together? Like, give us a Spanish examples.
So we went through the see it and say it. For the older two, that didn't exist yet, right? Because I was still developing it as we went. But for the younger ones, they did it, and of course, they did it better because we're speaking in Spanish all the time, and
Yeah.
I would push them a little bit more. But because it's so hands on, it has all the things. It's flashcard based, so you have the audio, the visual, and the tactile, all the learning styles, and that does exist because of my 5 opposites. And
Mhm.
teaching all the different homeschoolers, you end up developing different methods. So for us, I didn't have to adapt it because the curriculum itself already fed all the different personalities in all the different ways. For high school Spanish, I absolutely, just like you do with your kids, you go, oh, this kid needs to be listened to. This kid needs to hear it. This kid needs to write it. And so
Mhm.
it was just like any other scholar level. How do you study this best? Well, so we would adapt the scholar level just like we would science, math, history, anything else.
Mhm. Which I appreciate, like to learn with a curriculum that's adaptable. That's our Seven Sisters whole mindset. So I
Right.
really appreciate. All right, so for our listeners who are new to the concept of flip flop Spanish, first you have to say why it's called flip flop Spanish, and say what's unique because it's a very unique program. And it's been around long enough that you got the track record to show that it's helpful. So,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So,
Finally.
so explain flip flop Spanish.
So flip flop Spanish is a flashcard base. I'm grabbing some French ones. We actually have flip flop French, but I don't have any of the Spanish cards on my thing. So we have flip flop French and flip flop German coming out as well.
Wow.
So to show you the method works, there's
Yeah.
other people that want to use it for other languages. So on one side you have the photo, and
Uh-huh.
it's a photo, not a drawing or anything like that. And on the other side you have in this case,
The
French.
poisson.
Yeah, there you go. French, the English, and then the
Uh-huh.
phonetic spelling. So
Yeah.
whatever language you're looking at is on the back. However,
Mhm.
when you're listening to the lesson is audio.
Mhm.
So you lay out the flashcards, you push play on the audio, and you're seeing the item and hearing the instructions, just like you learned your first language.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
breaking it down, that's why it's called flip flop, because it's a flashcard based system. So you flip it over, flop it down. And
Uh-huh.
so it's all about that tactile flipping and flopping. You can check if you need to. The
Mhm.
reference is there for you.
Mhm.
But we're really focusing on that photo side to help you to not try and read and pronounce things correctly or incorrectly in your brain. Your brain is already hardwired. Hear the word, say the word.
Yeah.
So, but if you're scared, we do have the phonetic
Yeah.
spelling underneath each one there, so you can
Yeah.
actually sound it out.
So it's
Um,
very multi-sensory.
yes,
Mhm.
right. So the idea is recreating what you did when you learned to speak initially, because your brain is already ready for that.
Mm.
The other curriculum that I tried to use, like, because I didn't set out to make a curriculum. I was just teaching kids Spanish,
Yeah.
and there was nothing out there for me to use that worked very well in that 1 hour a week setting. So
Yeah.
the list of words, your brain's not hardwired to learn that way.
Yeah.
Your brain's not hardwired to read before you communicate. You want to
Yeah.
communicate first. So
Yeah.
this, jumps over all that and also breaks it down. Like once you see this one thing, you're not overwhelmed. You're like, oh, I can learn to say that one word in Spanish. It sounds
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Yes. And now you're like, I've got this. So that motivates you to like, well, can I add another one? Can I add another one? And so these tiny little bits of information makes it like attainable
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
sustainable, right? Because you just, oh, I can do flashcards.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole goal, is removing obstacles So
Yeah.
anybody can speak whatever language you want.
So they if you had a mom with elementary age kids, where would they come in on the flip flop Spanish? Like, is
So,
there? Yeah.
yeah, so see it and say it level 1 is
Mhm.
is effective as young as 3-year-olds all
Okay.
the way up to senior citizens. So even if you have teenagers in there, I would say the whole family sits down and starts with level 1, lesson 1. You lay
Uh-huh.
out the 6 flashcards. After a couple of weeks, the teenager is going to be like, I'm ready for a little bit more. You
Hmm.
can continue on, and I have other supplements and things like that. But if they're ready for that scholar level, give it to them. But the idea is you want that X plus 1. Wherever you are is X. I want to
Hmm.
push you 1 above. And
Uh-huh.
so parents, children, all ages, I never want to give you, X plus 10 because
Hmm.
you sit down in a pile and cry, or
Yeah.
you think I'm bad at this. And
Yeah.
both of those, I don't want to create obstacles.
It's a growth oriented
Yes.
process.
Yeah.
Yes, I appreciate it. Now, for the scholar level, how does that work? What do they work on in that?
It's a video course, so it's still self-paced because I don't want the child to have to keep up with me. Well, I have to be there at Tuesday at 1 a.m., 1 p.m., whatever it is, and
Yeah.
I'm not quite ready, but the class is happening. So because it is a video course, they can go as fast or as slow as they need once they accomplish the activities in the textbook. So it's got all of it. It's got video, it's got a textbook, it's got the audio, and then they have access to me twice a week. So we have live classes just
Oh,
like you and I are sitting here speaking, same
uh-huh.
idea.
Mhm.
So I start every session with who has questions, and I have 8-year-olds all the way up to seniors in high school join
Oh,
me for those things, and we have a
oh,
great time. I have geniuses across the nation that I've
uh-huh.
gotten to hug and meet at these conferences. It's been
Oh,
wonderful.
oh, that's it. Yeah, the beautiful thing about conferences is meeting some of those students and parents in real life. Yeah, that is beautiful. All right, so let's say we got parents and they've got teenagers at home and they got to get their world language credits in and they say that flip-flop Spanish sounds like a thing that would fit our personalities. How do they connect with you?
They can go to flipflopspanish.com, or they can find me on Facebook. If you type in Flip Flop Spanish, Facebook, Instagram,
Yeah,
X, all the different things, I'm on all of them and I answer
you're
all of
there.
them. Yeah, it doesn't get outsourced to anybody else. It's just me, my husband, and whichever children we have at home. That's the Flip Flop family,
That's a
and we
flip
do it.
flop family. Well, and it's so easy to remember flip flops.
Yeah,
So,
hopefully.
all right. Any other thoughts you'd like to leave our friends with?
I think the biggest thing is trying to remember how confused and frustrated you were as a teenager. I think our empathy kind of decreases as we get older because we're trying to raise these really well-rounded, well-disciplined, highly intelligent children. We're giving our lives, our time, our income, our resources. We're doing all these things for them, and all
Mhm.
they can do is blah blah blah. We don't quite remember how
Yeah.
we felt
Mm.
as 14, 15. And so I think that'd be the one thing is when you're flustered with your teens, if you can just kind of go back to that time when you were on your bed crying, or when you were late at night and your brain wouldn't stop, or
Yeah.
whatever it was, not, well, I would never talk to my parents that way. I'm not talking about that. I'm
Yeah.
talking about how you felt. And I think that really helps us to help them better to
Yeah.
empathize with them.
That definite the grace and the empathy in that. I really appreciate that. Yeah. So everybody check out Suzanne and Flip Flop Spanish because yeah, Suzanne and her gang are just precious and this is a great resource. All right. Well, this has been the Homeschool High School podcast brought to you by Seven Sisters Homeschool.com and the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Family Network. I know the name of the network we are part of. And thank you, Seth Tillman, for editing. We will see everybody next week.